The native peoples of North America are the original inhabitants of North America, believed to have migrated into the region between 40,000 to 14,000 years ago, developing into separate nations with distinct and sophisticated cultures. These autonomous nations spread from Alaska through Canada and the lower United States. During the Archaic period, some native populations moved from a hunter-gatherer paradigm to a more sedentary social model, as evidenced by sites such as Watson Brake, Poverty Point, and others of varying size, developed throughout the region during the Woodland and Mississippian culture eras. The cultures that developed in and around these sites were distinct from one another, but shared a worldview that included belief in a higher power and disembodied spirits, the value of community over individual needs, reciprocity in interaction with the environment and each other, the importance of ritual and tradition, the practice of warfare and slavery, and conservation of resources. Women were highly respected in the communities and frequently served as leaders or advisors in government. These separate communities developed into what are sometimes called tribes at some point prior to c. 980 to c. 1030 CE, when the first European settlement was established in North America by Leif Erikson at Lonsau Meadows, Newfoundland. By the time of the beginning of European colonization of the Americas in the 15th century CE, they were highly developed political and social entities associated with a specific region and a certain territory within that region. Although European expansion across Canada and the United States eventually deprived the indigenous peoples of their ancient lands, the nations still exist today, and the image of the vanished Indian is as much of a myth as the noble savage or similar tropes developed by European and American scholars during the 19th and early 20th centuries. The first immigrants are believed to have arrived from Asia across the Bering Land Bridge that connected modern-day Siberia with Alaska, and are thought to have arrived with dogs, which were already domesticated. At the same time, or later, people are also believed to have arrived by sea, establishing themselves along the west coast and down through South America. Based on archaeological evidence, there seem to have been several migrations over many years, but why the people chose to relocate is unknown. From Beringia, the people moved into the region of modern-day Alaska, across Canada, and down through what is now the United States. By the time of the last glacial maximum, migrants had established themselves as far south as modern New Mexico. As the Earth warmed and the glaciers melted, Beringia was submerged c. 10,000 BCE, ending further migration across a land route, though it is possible people still arrived by sea. All of the above is the generally accepted narrative of how North America came to be inhabited, but it should be noted these are only theories. No one actually knows how or when people first appeared on the continent, and each Native American nation has its own origin story. However it happened, and wherever they came from, North Americans had established themselves in different regions by the Archaic period, developing unique cultures and tribal identities, eventually numbering over 500, with a population in the millions. Owing to considerations of space, only a few of these tribal entities are listed below by region and language family. Arctic Alaska, Eskimolute, Aleut, Haida, Input, Inuit, Tlingit, among others. Canada, Inuit, Métis, and over 50 distinct nations, numbering over 600 diverse communities. Northwest Coast, Athabascan, Chimacum, Chinookian, Haida, Salishan, and Tlingit, numbering over 60 distinct tribal entities. Northeastern Woodlands, Algonquian, and Iroquois nations, numbering over 50 distinct socio-political entities. Southeastern Woodlands, Muskogee, Yuchi, Siouan, and Iroquoian nations, numbering around 50 different tribes. Plains and Prairie, Algonquian, Siouan, and Caddoan nations, numbering around 40 different tribes. Plateau, Lithuanian, Salishan, Shahaptian, and Wailatpuan nations, numbering over 20 different tribes. Great Basin, the Uto-Aztecan nations including the Shoshone and Paiute, numbering around 10 tribes. California, Hokan, Penutian, Ritwan, Uto-Aztecan, Yukian, numbering around 30 tribes. Southwest, Athabascan, Pueblo, Tanoan, Uto-Aztecan, Yuman, and Zuni, numbering over 50 tribes. These nations developed from the communities established during the Archaic, Woodland, and Mississippian eras, and by c. 1540 CE were sophisticated socio-political entities. Scholar Michael G. Johnson writes, "The complicated geographical diffusion of tribes with a common ancestral language base suggests continual movement, invasion, migration, and conquest long before the white man set foot on the continent. We know of substantial cultures that came and went long before European contact, such as the Adena and Hopewell cultures, which were partly based on Mesoamerican gardening. The Europeans did not, therefore, disturb a Garden of Eden, but rather a continent of tribal groups and cultures that were fully dynamic. These cultures were already developing by the Dalton-Folsom period, which provides evidence of a belief in an afterlife, a spirit world, and a priority placed on the community above the individual. The Dalton-Folsom people developed technology for hunting and construction that included drills, hammers, scrapers, knives, and the atlatl, a stick with a cup at one end that held the butt of a spear and fired it toward an object with greater momentum than if thrown by hand. During the Archaic period, maize was introduced from Mesoamerican peoples trading with those of the North American Southwest, encouraging the move away from a hunter-gatherer lifestyle to agriculture and permanent settlements. Maize became the staple crop of the North Americans as its cultivation spread from the Southwest in every direction. Beans and squash, also introduced from Mesoamerica, were joined with maize as the three sisters of agriculture. The corn stalks provide a natural trellis for the beans to climb. The beans process nitrogen for the roots of all three, and the squash leaves shade the ground, preventing weeds and regulating moisture. Nutritionally, the three crops also complement each other, providing a well-balanced diet. Even after the cultivation of the three sisters became widespread, the hunter-gatherer culture continued with these crops serving as a supplement. Some nations, like those of the Great Plains, continued as hunter-gatherers longer than others. The peoples of the southeastern woodlands began erecting monumental sites c. 5400 BCE and developed the technology that produced major population centers such as Watson Break, Poverty Point, Etowah Mounds, Serpent Mound, Pinson Mounds, Moundville, and Cahokia, once the largest urban center on the North American continent. These centers, except for those like Pinson Mounds or Serpent Mound, understood as religious astronomical sites, engaged in local and long-distance trade with each other, establishing well-worn routes between the cities, acceptable forms of barter, and production distribution methods. As noted, each of these nations were distinct cultural entities, and so any discussion of them as a group falls into generalities. Overall, Native American culture was informed by the spiritual beliefs of the people, which held that all things were imbued with the same life force and deserved one's respect. Scholar Jack D. Forbes comments, European writers long ago referred to indigenous Americans' ways as animism, a term that means lifeism. And it is true that most or perhaps all Native Americans see the entire universe as being alive, that is, as having movement and an ability to act. But more than that, Indigenous Americans tend to see this living world as a fantastic and beautiful creation, engendering extremely powerful feelings of gratitude and indebtedness, obliging us to behave as if we are related to one another. An overriding characteristic of Native North American religion is that of gratitude, a feeling of overwhelming love and thankfulness for the gifts of the Creator and the Earth universe. Each separate nation understood itself as part of every other, but this did not mean they always lived in peace or respected each other's territory. Wars were fought over water rights to prevent outsiders from hunting in one's territory for tribal prestige and power, and for captives who could be ransomed or held as slaves. Common weapons were the bow and arrow, spears, knives, and tomahawks. Some warriors also carried shields made of animal hide and wore breastplate armor of hide and animal bone. Scalps were taken from enemies killed in battle as trophies and encouraged personal prestige, respect, and social standing. Contrary to the view later perpetuated by European and American writers, Native American nations mounted formal pitched battles, engaged in the exchange of prisoners of war, and entered into peace treaties with each other. One's individual tribe was considered the most important, and, as Johnson observes, many tribal names translate simply as the real people or original people. In establishing their primacy, though, as Johnson also notes, many of the tribal names known today are not the same as those the indigenous Americans knew in the past. One was responsible for honoring the beliefs of one's tribe and respecting the land of one's people, but was not obligated to extend that same courtesy toward outsiders unless a formal agreement had been reached, joining nations in a mutually beneficial pact. One of the reasons Native Americans first engaged in contact with European arrivals was for the advantage guns and horses gave them over their neighbors. Wars were fought, and lands and captives were taken out of a perceived necessity to sustain one's people, but there was no concept of land ownership comparable to the European model. The earth and its resources did not belong to anyone specifically, but were a gift of the Great Spirit to everyone collectively, and one was expected to give back through rituals of reciprocity that maintained the life cycle. Scholar Larry J. Zimmerman describes one such ritual observed for ensuring robust harvests.